Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to my review of a tank you don't see very much in the game. This is the British Tier 5 Premium Medium tank, the Matilda Black Prince. Now, this is where I would usually give a bit of a historical ramble about the thing, but the fact remains that, well, the idea was to take a Cromwell turret, put it on a Matilda chassis. There was one prototype made. It was not very successful, there were lots of problems with it, and the idea was not pursued. I don't know anything else about this, frankly. And it looks like a strange beastie, let's be honest. So let's just get on with what we have in the game. But I will briefly say, this was, bear in mind when you compare this tank to others that are in the game, this was the first British tank to be introduced into World of Tanks. And so, bear in mind that it may well have been power creeped since its introduction, for example. Anyway, what does it you actually get in the game? Well, 610 hit points, which is a lot for a Tier 5 medium tank. And there are a few Tier 5 premium mediums that have around about this number of hit points. The T25 is another one. If I can find it, there it is. T25 has 610 as well, and there's a couple of others. It's a good slab of hit points, it's a very good slab of hit points to have on a Tier 5 medium tank, but it does usually mean that the tank is hiding up some weaknesses in order to get that slab of health. It's a 30-ton machine with a 190 horsepower engine, giving you 6 horsepower per ton. 6. This is the slowest of the 3 Matilda tanks in the game. There's the Matilda Tier 4 British medium tank, there's the Matilda 4 Tier 5 Soviet premium medium tank, and there's the Matilda Black Prince, and this is the slowest of them. And the Matildas are not fast to begin with, but I really just want to emphasise 6 horsepower per ton. Top speed of 22 kilometers a second. This thing is damn slow. Traverse speed of 35 and a turret traverse of 34 is actually pretty respectable, and it's a lot better than you would expect for such a sluggish machine. So while this thing may not go particularly fast, don't assume if you come across one of these that you can just circle it to death with ease. You would probably want to track it first. Armour. Well, it's the Matilda hull. 75 at the front, 70 at the sides with some spaced armour over the tracks, and 55 at the rear. Shouldn't come as any great surprise. Turret armour, it's the stock Cromwell turret. 75 at the front, 70 at the sides, 55 at the rear. This armour profile, well, I will talk about the armour in more detail in a bit, but the Matilda's armour is very good at Tier 4. At Tier 5, it's starting to look a bit ropey, and this turret, again, if it were on a Tier 3 or 4 machine, the armour would be pretty good. This is a Tier 5 tank, and the armour is flat as a pancake. This turret isn't really going to stop anything. What I'm trying to get at is that this thing is slow, ponderous, and the armour isn't actually very good. But as I say, I will talk more about the armour in a moment. I will also talk more about the gun in a minute. 570 meter signal range is nothing to get excited about, but it's not a hindrance either, and a 350 meter view range is not very exciting, but, you know, it's a Tier 5 medium tank, it's about par for the course. It's just nothing to really, it's not really a positive. Okay, so I said I'd mention the gun. This is, of course, a premium tank, so there's no grind or anything, you just get the one gun. What is it? It's a 6-pounder. The ubiquitous 6-pounder gun that you find on loads of mid-tier British machines. 57mm gun firing a blistering 26 rounds a minute, with 110 alpha damage, 110 penetration and 75 alpha damage. It's a low alpha damage pew-pew gun. In fact, it comes with 1957 DPM, which actually is pretty respectable. It's higher than a lot of the Tier 8 medium tanks, so that's not too shabby. If you're willing to fire a bit of APCR, that penetration shoots up to 180, and this is a Tier 5 tank, but it gets limited matchmaking, so you will never see Tier 7 tanks. And a little while ago, I would have said you don't really need the APCR, you can penetrate everything you come across fine with AP, but then they introduced the Tier 6 Japanese heavy tank, the OI, seems to get called a variety of different things. I think it's supposed to be pronounced OE. Anyway, either way, that has about 150 something millimeters of frontal armour without much in the way of weak spots, so actually the 180 penetration could be useful there. The HE rounds from a 57mm gun are not even worth bothering with. 0.41 dispersion at 100 meters is not very good, let's be honest. And an aiming time of 2.3 seconds, that may sound pretty good, but when you consider the blistering rate of fire, it's actually not that impressive. And in practice, you find that this gun tends to reload faster than it aims, which can be a problem. It means that at longer ranges, you can't really use that full DPM. You can only really use it at close range. So, that's the gun. Like I said, it's a premium tank, so there is no grind to mention. Oh, sorry, one last thing on the gun that I should mention. This thing, to the front and the sides, and really anywhere apart from this rear segment, gets 13 degrees of gun depression, which is really rather good. And that's how you end up, or I end up often using this tank. Because the armour at tier 5 is no longer particularly special, you end up trying to use that 13 degrees of gun depression to expose as little of it as possible. Kind of like the Matilda 4, that gets 15 degrees, which is even better, but this is still good. So use that gun depression where you can. Anyway, no grind on this tank. I'm also not going to talk about, crew skills, because this is a premium tank, so for those who don't know, one of the big benefits of a premium tank is that you can take a crew from any other vehicle of the same nation and type, put it in this tank, not retrain them, and they will be able to use their skills to full effectiveness and get full experience and all that jazz. So, for example, I could shove in here what crew is this? Cromwell Berlin crew, and they would be able to fight perfectly well in this tank. No hindrances or anything, and that means that I can take advantage of the daily double, or your daily triple in this case because it's Halloween, experience in order to train your crew faster. Also, as it's tier 5 premium tank, the income from this machine is not too bad. So, don't need to talk about crew skills because you can just use whatever British medium tank crew you want to train them up. So your crew skills will be for whatever tank they are actually trained for. Crew skills are irrelevant. Consumables, I've just got your standard ones. Are there any others you might want to consider? Well, you could go with pudding and tea, although I wouldn't really recommend it. It's only tier 5. Pudding and tea is really going to eat into your credits. Like I say, I wouldn't bother. Equipment. Well, you could make a few different cases here. Personally, I've chosen a setup that maximises the gun performance. So we've got vents for all-round boost, gun rammer to get that reload time down, and a gun laying drive to get that aiming time down, because otherwise you're going to struggle to use that rate of fire. Other pieces of equipment you might want to take. The only other one I would really recommend is binocular telescopes. To get that view range up. Now, I'm saying this over coated optics because coated optics only give you a 10% buff to your view range, and 10% on 350 meters is still only 385 meters, which is definitely not bad at tier 5, but it's also not spectacular, and as you're a slow machine, you're unlikely to be doing much of your own spotting anyway. I think binocular telescopes would be the better choice than optics for this machine. Having said that, you're probably going to spend a lot of time moving, and so you're probably not going to use them very much. I've just accepted the fact that I have kind of mediocre view range. There isn't really anything else I'd really recommend you whacking on this. Maybe a toolbox? Nah, not really a toolbox. You just don't have the armour to warrant it, really. I should also quickly mention the ammo loadout. You can see here, well, the first thing that's worth noting, 55 rounds of ammo is not actually that much when you're firing a shot every 2 seconds that does 75 damage with 0.41 dispersion. This is one of the few tanks, in fact I think it's one of only 2 tanks that I have actually run out of ammunition in. In fact I lost a game because I ran out of ammunition before, and that was kind of frustrating. I take 5 rounds of APCR for those just in case moments. I don't think I've ever actually fired a round of APCR from this gun. You don't really need it, but you might actually want to invest in it more because you have a very limited ammo supply, and so that means you want to make sure your shots penetrate. So I leave that up to you. The high explosive ammo is utter garbage and I wouldn't bother. Is there anything else to mention about this tank in the garage? I don't really think there is. So, without further ado, we're going to go and have a quick look at critical module locations and the armour profile and whatnot. So, critical module locations on this tank, there isn't actually much to say, it's all pretty predictable. Your driver sits in the front, in the middle of the hull. If you look at the side profile, you have your standard kind of commander, gunner, loader in the turret. Engine toward the rear, all pretty standard. The only thing worth noting really is that your ammo rack, this white box here, your ammo rack is kind of in the middle of the hull toward the rear. So just behind this central riveting point in the hull, that's where your ammo rack is. So that's worth bearing in mind. From the rear, or you've got your engine at the back, nothing really surprising. From the other side, you get the same story with regard to your ammo rack. And from the top, again, there's really nothing to take particular note of. So it's only really the location of that ammo rack that is very relevant. Onto the armour scheme then. I mean, looking at this tank from the front, you can see these red sections are 76mm of armour. Basically, shooting it anywhere in the turret apart from the gun mantlet here. So this thing does have a gun mantlet, but it's an internal gun mantlet. So apart from here, where you can start getting 152 effective armour, shoot it anywhere else in the front of the turret, and if you've got 80mm of penetration or more, and you'll probably go through. The top of the turret is not particularly... Well, I mean, if we try and get it... Yeah, the top of the turret is like 20mm thick at an extreme angle, but you just need a 60mm gun to completely overmatch that. Sorry. If the tank's using its gun depression, that won't even be a viable shot. Front of the hull, well, you get the 75mm of frontal armour as advertised. It's got these shoulder cheek sections, and the angle back, if you're looking at the tank head-on, sends that effective thickness over 100mm. But really, again, if you've got sort of 80-85mm of penetration or more, if you just shoot it straight on that flat section of armour, you'll probably go through. It's thick, but it's flat, so there's your ticket to penetrating the Matilda from the front. Things like your lower plate are not effective shots because they're angled. If you're looking at the side profile of this machine, side of the turret is only 64, shouldn't be a particularly difficult penetration. Side of the hull is 70-odd millimeters, again, not a particularly difficult penetration for most tier tanks. Try to avoid, again, shooting toward the front of the hull because, again, you're dealing with this angled section, so your effective thickness there goes up to around 100mm. Also try to avoid shooting it in the track regions because there you have hull armour plus tracks plus spaced armour, and that can actually eat quite a lot of shells. If you're in a Matilda, try and angle a little bit. If you angle something like this, then the effective armour on your front jumps up to around 90mm. The effective armour on your side is around 100 there. You can start getting more effective armour values. The only things to then beware of is that this shoulder section flattens out to be 71mm effective, give or take, but if you've got your turret pointed at them anyway, that's still 76mm, and that's really the weak point armor-wise of this tank, because regardless of what you do, if you have your turret pointed at them, people can generally penetrate you in the turret, and you're going to have your turret pointed at them if you want to shoot them, because your reload time is about 2 seconds. Rear of this machine, it's nothing really to write home about. I mean, it's relatively thick as far as tank rears go, but you're still going to get penetrated. And of course, you've got this 20mm of armour on the top over the turret and the engine deck. So if artillery gets to land a shell on either of those, it will wreck you. Mainly an issue for those high-arcing artillery pieces, such as the Bishop and the FV304 Burt. But yeah, that's kind of the armour scheme on this machine. Try and keep it angled wherever you can. Try and encourage shots into that track area, and bear in mind your turret is made of tissue. Well, really, at tier 5 the armour on the tank is not fantastic, so use that 13 degrees of gun depression, give them the smallest shot that you possibly can, and hope people hit your gun mantlet, because that's where you can actually get some bounces. So, we've spoken about that, let's go and have a quick look at some gameplay. So I'm just going to show you the one game from the Matilda Black Prince. It gets limited matchmaking, so there isn't that much difference in showing you a game when you're bottom tier and top tier, if that makes sense. So I'm tuned up with Careless One. We are here on El Haluf. Careless One is in his Churchill 3, so another tier 5 premium tank with limited matchmaking and a 6-pounder gun. And we're gonna do the best we can. So top tier, but it's worth bearing in mind a good half of each team are tier 5. So whilst the matchmaking is pretty decent, it's not the best matchmaking. that this tank can see. I mean, clearly, if you're one of, if you're the only top tier tank, that can be a lot better. I do actually remember being in one game. This is nothing to do with the Matilda Black Prince. Being in one game in, I think it was the BT7, so a little tier 3 light tank. And on each team there were 14 tier 3 tanks and 1 tier 5. We had a Panzer 3/4. The enemy team had a Churchill 3 actually. And the Churchill 3 promptly murdered everything it came across. But there you go. Sometimes the matchmaker does weird things like that. Now you can probably tell that I'm babbling here because I'm trying to fill in time, because this thing does 22 kilometers an hour at best. I mean, you can see here we're trundling along at 15, 16, 17 kilometers an hour. And while I could speed this up just to get into the action, so to speak, I do actually want to show you this, because if you're going to buy this tank, or if you're thinking of buying this tank, this is the sort of thing you're going to have to deal with. One other thing I should mention is that because this tank gets limited matchmaking, Wargaming aren't introducing any more tanks with limited matchmaking. Because it screws up with the matchmaker or something, it makes matchmaking awkward. So, and they seem to be systematically removing those tanks that do have limited matchmaking. So, I don't know how much longer this tank's going to be in the game. I haven't heard any direct mention of removing it, but I think it would be a logical follow-on from the behaviour that we've seen. So if you do, for whatever reason, want to buy this, you might want to do it sooner rather than later. Although if you can wait for it to be on discount, that would be good. Now, KV-1 here. KV-1 is well armoured, but I'm aiming for that mid-plate, which is only 70-something millimeters thick and quite flat. So my 110 average penetration is perfectly capable of punching through that, providing I can hit it. And that's where the accuracy on this gun can be a bit of a problem. But you can see 110 penetration is perfectly capable of dealing with the most heavily armoured tanks that you see at tier 5. The only tank that you can actually have problems with at tier 5 is the AT2. Even that kind of little commander's hatch on the AT2 is over 100 millimeters thick. Interestingly, there's a Matilda Black Prince on the enemy team. I put a shot into him, he puts a shot into me and takes out my driver. And there's also a Churchill 3 on the enemy team. So, reversing here, but just trying to keep up the barrage of fire into these guys. And you may have noticed the scoreline is, I was about to say 2-5, it's now 3-6. Bounce a shot there, and put another one into the enemy Matilda Black Prince. And there's a T-28 shooting me, and I'm just trying to expose as little of my tank as I can. Unfortunately, VK, the enemy VK now is Careless One. I'm just trying to expose as little of my tank as I can and back off slowly, because I am now all alone. There's a T-67 who's coming by the look of it to try and help me. Su-85I, one more shot into the SU will kill him, but he backs off. VK is going, I don't know why he's being quite that aggressive. And he's dead. Can we get a shot on this Su-85 to finish him off? Doesn't look like it. Still trying though, because, killing a tank would be good at this stage, but no, the shot misses. And I don't want to expose too much of myself to him, but the T-67 who's come to help nails him in the end. So there's probably still that enemy Matilda Black Prince down there. I'm prioritising him because I'm not really worried about the gun on the A20. That's kind of a little pea shooter. Whereas the Matilda Black Prince is perfectly capable of shooting me, and he seems to know how to shoot me. So, T-28 on the enemy team, thankfully is using the stock gun, and A20, I don't know, maybe he doesn't want to live anymore. But I don't know what he's thinking he's going to achieve. He does actually survive, but... And T-28 is doing something similar. Just trying to do as much damage to these guys and kill as many of them as we can before I likely get taken down. My driver is now dead, and so am I. Scoreline is 7-10. I'll speed this along a little bit because, yeah, there isn't really much to see from this point onward. 7-11, 8-11, it doesn't get any better. So that bit of gameplay didn't actually last very long, but what did you see from it? Well, you saw that the Matilda Black Prince, against other tier 5 tanks, they can go through your turret armor. There we go. And so your armor isn't that good. But against some lower tier tanks, and this thing does get limited matchmaking, against some lower tier tanks the armor can definitely bounce some things. And we actually bounced a good number of shots in that game. And if we hadn't died we may well have finished with steel wall out of that game. I think we bounced, we'll see it in a minute, but I think we bounced almost 1,000 damage, which is fairly respectable. So the armour can definitely play its part. It's not terrible, but it's starting to look a little... It's nowhere near as reliable at tier 5 as it was on the Matilda at tier 4, and of course the Matilda has a smaller turret with some angles, so more likely to get some bounces there. Anyway, let's go and round things off in the garage. No, let's go and see the results first, then we'll round things off in the garage. How did that game end up panning out? Well, we got a first class mastery, even though it was a defeat, 5 for effect and high caliber, and it was of course the heroic resistance from that high caliber that got us the first class mastery. We finished at the top of our team with 1,564 damage done and 2 kills, 824 experience from that. Careless One came in 4th with 577 damage. The real difference here was that I was the only person on my team to do more than 1,000 damage. The enemy team had 3 people who did more than 1,000 damage. You know, that gives you some sort of metric about how various people performed. 31 shots fired, 25 hits, 21 penetrations, so you can see there that penetrating wasn't so much the problem as hitting the target was for that 1,564 damage. Now in that game we actually received 29 hits, of which 8 penetrated and 21 didn't, so if you're top tier, your armour can definitely get you some bounces. Just try not to expose more of it than you have to. We blocked 930 damage with our armour, spotted 2 enemy tanks, damaged 7, killed 2, and got 160 odd assistance damage into the bargain, only travelling 800 metres because it's slow, and that's how that game went. With a premium account, we made a 51,000 credit profit. I mean, if you look at that, despite the fact that we died, repair costs only 2,000 credits, ammunition costs 180 credits. The ammunition for those 6-pounder guns is very cheap. And so even without a premium account on that defeat, I should point out it was a defeat, we would have still made 33,000 credit profit. So this can be a rather profitable machine to run. I mean, you're not going to make the sort of astounding sums of money you do in tier 8 premium tanks, but it can still make you a healthy amount of money, and in terms of bang for your buck, if you will, that can be quite a nice return. So yeah, let's go and round things off in the garage. So what do I think of this tank overall? It's not very good. Let's get that out of the way. This is a poor machine. What's wrong with it? Well, if you try and consider it in the context of tier 5 medium tanks, if you look at something like the T-34, either the Chinese or the Soviet variants, they get a very similar gun on a far more mobile chassis with armour that, well, the armour on the Matilda Black Prince isn't that effective anyway, so armour, meh. You lose a bit of health, I grant you. And you do lose the gun depression, but they are still better machines. If you try and consider this in the context of tier 5 premiums with limited matchmaking, well, it's basically a Churchill 3. But with less ammo and worse armour. And a smaller profile. And better gun depression, to be fair. But all told, I think the Churchill 3 is the better machine. If you're trying to look at this from the perspective of a British medium tank crew trainer, that's where you might be able to find a reason to buy this. I mean, if you consider what British premium medium tanks are there in the game, you have the Matilda Black Prince, this at tier 5, you have the Cromwell Berlin at tier 6, which is an absolutely fantastic machine because it's a Cromwell, but it's not on regular sale in the shop. I think it's been on sale on the EU server twice. I assume it will come out at some point, but only for limited periods of time, so that's not a machine you can reliably and regularly get hold of. The only other one is that the FV4202 tier 10 British medium tank is being replaced by the Centurion Action 10, and the FV is being turned into a tier 8 premium. So you might be able to buy that in the shop at some point. The problem with that is that by the stats, that machine looks absolutely terrible. And it will be a tier 8 premium, so it's going to cost you a lot of money. So while the Matilda Black Prince is not very good, at least it's only tier 5, so it doesn't actually cost that much. Speaking of which, I should probably mention how much it does actually cost. It costs a grand total of 1,750 gold. How much, or what will 1,750 gold buy you in the grand scheme of things? Well, if you were to buy some premium account, then it will buy you something of the order of a couple of weeks. 7 days is 1250, a month is 2,500. This is on EU. So something of the order of a few weeks of premium time is what this tank is worth. It's only tier 5, and you can buy it on discount if there are discounts on tier 5 premium tanks at the time, as there sometimes are. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is that your options for medium British crew trainers are really very limited. Choice between a fantastic tank that's not for regular sale, what looks to be a terrible tank that might be for regular sale in the future, and this. So if you really want a British crew trainer, yeah, you can get the Matilda Black Prince. You can have fun in it, but don't kid yourself that this is a good machine. It is not. But you can definitely have fun in it. I have had fun in mine. I've had mine for quite a while now. I have fun in it, and that's all that really matters. Although I was quite relieved when I got hold of the Cromwell Berlin so that I could train my British medium tank crews. God, I'm struggling to get the words out lately. I can train those crews without having to play the Matilda Black Prince. That did come as a little bit of a relief. So, there we go. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about it. So, yeah, it's not a great machine, but for some people in a very particular situation, you might want to consider it. And there's a very good reason you don't see very many of them on the battlefield, because it's not very good. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, found it informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.